Okay, this is part two on this core question that goes on here about if all of Europe used to be, or any of Europe used to be black people, or what we're actually referring to in reality. We ended here on Francois Marie, and I thought I would get to the end of it, but no, it wasn't going to make it, and I just wouldn't shut up, so it cut. So let's look at where they are and what her last statement was that we were in, after her telling you that Africans are here and that we've got a dark secret and there were black people all over the place, which is totally disproven by genetics and every possible form of art and such. But she tells you flip-flop. I do not think that Europe was originally black, but there's evidence of these pockets of blacks who migrated from Africa. Well, there's African people who migrated up, but they were endemic Caucasians and settled in southern Europe, the Balkans, and British Isles, and Scandinavia before anyone else. Yeah, that's right where we were when it cut. She wants you to believe that black people migrated from Africa and settled in southern Europe and Balkans. Where did they go? Because they would have had to come through Caucasians that never recorded it. Oh, they got on boats. No, they never had a seaworthy boat. It's just a sad lie and a farce of how they got there. That's the question where I was asking earlier, how they had a summer home and a winter home, and they used to migrate back and forth. That amount of migration is hellish. Well, the glare helped keep black people from getting rickets if they were black, as dark as her picture. She's trying to come up with something. Worse than this, Francois come up with some silly shit so far, but let's continue, because she tells you, well, we was Scandinavians. I mean, I want you to remember that before anyone else. But that Fomorians were the earliest inhabitants of Ireland. Now, due to my D&D background and everything, you can probably look back even. I've made a few videos about this and the giants that were there and the connectives and the way they worked a mythology together with the people that they mended with, and said that they had kicked this mythical ass thing that happened. And it's actually a variation on a Titanomachy, just like the Titans of the Greeks that led into their opposition idea, that's also kind of reflected a little bit in the Bible. I've got this in other videos, but that Titanomachy that's there. So, Fomorians are the earliest inhabitants of Ireland and really Denmark and up in that area. They came from Africa and were described as having black skin, like descendants of Ham. Well, that's not true at all. They're not described as having black skin. In fact, a lot of them were described as having either a pinkish skin or even basically the color of snow or blue, like being frozen to death, and the way that that would look and so on. It's a lot of things that gave people the idea of this, but no one knows what gave the idea that the black people, that they have dark skin. But then also she tries to throw in that triple loop in there. Maybe I'd sneak this in. Descendants of Ham. Descendants of Ham aren't black. Ham is all the ancient Canaanites and so on too. It would be more appropriate to say they're red-headed Caucasian people, to be discerning, rather than to say that they were black people whatsoever. But Hamites are around that northern part of Africa there in the Mediterranean and all around the loop there, with nothing stopping them, and they're a division of the Caucasian race. You can look it up. There's not some sneaky Noah's child, somebody cursed. Well, who cursed him? Was it a god? How did that happen? Noah did. Well, Noah's not a god, but you never know. I mean, of course, God could have done something to him, but does it ever say that in the Bible? No. I've got another idea. Who would he mate with? Oh, snap. Now, you're not going to try to add extra people. And, of course, Ham wasn't dark-skinned, and none of the others except for Canaan. Well, so it's trying to say Canaanites. Well, the ancient Canaanites weren't black either. In fact, the Phoenicians, well known to be redheads and all that, called themselves Canaan. Oh, so that's where that comes from. It really gets pathetic after a while. If you don't look into it and you just want to make up some bullshit, people have got all kinds of things that they've heard. She tries to throw three in one sentence. They're from Ireland, they're from Africa, they're black, the descendants of Ham. Well, what we really have here is an ancient story about how ancient Phoenicians had migrated up, and that's the reason they're red-headed, but that's the reason the Irish have so much of it, and the Denmark and the people up in there too. It was a double compounding. Well, yeah, what about the Proto-Indo-Europeans too? This 2/3, 1/3 thing that she talked about just right above here is kinda the ratio it kinda went. All Caucasians. The former name of Norway was Formoria. No coincidence. She throws that in there with confidence. She's confidence West Sub-Saharan primitive Negroids was Formorian giants and half of Irish people and all this other stuff. It just doesn't make any sense. What's weird is when you look up Formorian giants, they tell you that it's a Titanomachy thing, situation where they ran into it at all, that there's no mention of anything of being black, or even if there's a question of them being black at all whatsoever. Yeah. Here's a description where this one has piercing blue eyes. But then again, those dark-skinned people that we talk about there, ancient of days, had those dark eyes, and some of that was taken into the effect of these brownies. Well, I've made the mistake before of saying that they could have brown eyes, but really, with Johannes Krauss and the other guys telling you every one of the dark-skinned people they're talking about there are blue-eyed, it actually blows two things out of the water. All blue-eyed people come from da-da-da-da-da, and no, that's never talking about black people whatsoever. Konang is one of the first of these Formorian giants to have settled, and they seem to have settled in the northern islands along the coast of Ireland, across Scotland and Norway. From where? From Africa, Caucasians. This is a part of the Exodus here, people. But she's trying to claim, they said Africa, therefore it means sub-Saharan primitives from below the Sahara that somehow magic I can't cognate. If you try to talk to them about this, they'll deny that North Africa was ever Caucasians and stuff, because they'll realize that they have to do that or all their thing falls apart. So it's kind of disgustingly sad. In Prehistoric Nations are inquiries concerning some of the great peoples and civilizations of antiquity and their probable relation to a still older civilization of the Ethiopians or Cushites of Arabia. John D. Baldwin wrote the following. Oh no, I'm ready for this, but let's go. According to the Irish records, the oldest people mentioned in Ireland, the Formorians, came from Africa, North Africa, Caucasians, because, listen to the description, and it is said that they had powerful fleets, that would be ships, people, and were distinguished for maritime enterprise. Is that not the Phoenicians? Yes, it is, for they had colonies all around the Mediterranean, including out the Pillars of Hercules and Cadiz that we all know about in Spain. But it connects up more. But then there's another connection to Scotia. She was one of the children of Akhenaten, and whenever that empire ended right there, that dynasty ended, they were supposedly kicked out. She left with a bunch of her people with a fleet of Phoenician ships. And that's the reason Scotland's named Scot. And Mary, Queen of Scots. There's another redhead, but Scotia was said to have been a redhead too, which really was hard to believe to a lot of people, but still they kept this tale, and it's written in a lot of old folklore and stuff, so people still kept it for the knowing of it. Now in the modern day we find their genetics, and the genetics being R1b of Akhenaten and that whole dynasty that's there, definitely. And the women being K, which hooks up to ancient Anatolia also, and lo and behold, there's the reality of the situation when they say Africa. But they want to say Africa means us. Really? Does it mean Khoisan? No, just you, right? Does it mean Nilotics? No, just you. Does it mean the Caucasian people with the ships that are all around North Africa that could have been possibly doing this, that aren't primitives? It doesn't mean that. Definitely to you not, right? That's weird. Revealed the face of the first European. Some sources attest that the Dacians were already familiar with dark-skinned people. Now, the Dacians are actually a Celtic-type people, Proto-Indo-Europeans. They had the Proto-Indo-European language, Thrace, and the Thracians we talked about at the start of this. But they were already familiar with dark-skinned people, as evidence of the existence of an African race appears to have been found on the territory of Romania. The Dacians were familiar with this. Listen, a new people has been discovered in prehistoric Dacia at the time of Ethiopian race, and is of a blackish yellow color or tan color. Real confusing on the description there, including color. Blackish yellow. Does anybody want to figure out what that works out as? Or how about tan? I see tan. And my blackish yellow. Well, there was a description, if you leave out the blackish, of the yellow jaundice of the people up in this area that they talked about, being Caucasians, these people that are the same as the Egyptians. But lo and behold, here we are with that Ethiopian problem again. For if you look up Herodotus' map, or if you've ever read the Iliad and the Odyssey, you'll find there are people all over the Caucasian world called Ethiopians. And so instantly you would come up to the conclusion that many, many people have, through scholarship throughout the ages, that the current people living in Abyssinia today which is what it used to be called until recently, are not the Ethiopians that they talked about at all. Well, at this one time, Herodotus says they're up the Nile and everything. Yeah, those aren't the people that used to be there in the first place. Let's get serious and let's quit talking about things that are here now versus things that were 3,000 years ago, and they're the same now, and that's not the reality of it at all, including with black people. And then seeing everything that they never knew existed gives them a problem, and they always want to interject themselves into places they didn't know existed. This brings the question of the origin of the Morvloks, or the Black Vlachs, who presumably hail from the same area. The Black Vlachs also is known as the Nigri Latini. Oh, so this is Black Latins. And if it has that word, you see it has to have something to do with it. The Black Prince isn't because of his dark features versus the family having lighter features, and people are questioning the queen there. Hey, so what color hair does the mailman have? No, it was, they were black. Can't you see? In the Bible, there's one place where a person is said to be like that too, but you look into it, they're calling on his robe, which we still use to robes as judges today. And if a judge wears a black robe, is he a black person? No. Well, Terrence Clemens is, right? Right, yes, but he's a Supreme Court justice, but that's not nominal. That's one that's been able to be going to Supreme Court justice, which is not a black thing either. So, some scholars go as far as saying Western Europe was anciently called Africa. Oh, I've shown you this in a map years ago, that Africa was named by Caucasian people for endemic North African Caucasians. And at the time, and then the Berbers that ended up going into Spain and doing all of that, and around that, and so it's Afri. And they say, well, that's because these people are even there too, across that Pillars of Hercules situation. Oh, well, how many of them are black? None. Then the Moors come through, and that's originally those people, so that would get the same declamation on a map, but they're, oh, it says Africans. Africans doesn't mean black, but black people can't understand that, even whenever it wasn't named. Well, it was named for Caucasians, after and by Caucasians. Like a lot of the world is Greek names, even though they had names for themselves sometimes. Such as Egypt itself. Not actually, Egyptus is a Greek river god. Or, I'm sorry, Nilus. is the Egyptian river god. Aegyptus is the brother of a Greek, and there's whole mythology that goes along with that, saying, of course, that they're Caucasians. They also both agreed that Neith was Athena, and that was their mother goddess that was the starter of it all from a time before either one of them started off. But the Egyptians themselves named themselves Kemet. Well, it's really not themselves, it was the land. It was named after that because the soil burst out of the Nile, a dark soil. It was the darkest soil, and it grew the richest plants. So what we have here is a land named after black soil. Not the people, definitely not. Wilford's investigations led him to remark that the 8th volume of the Asiatic Researchers that, and she quotes that, I guess I should say it that way, it is well known that they learned that at a very remote period Europe and Africa were considered as but one of the two grand divisions of the world, and that the appellation Africa was even extended to the western parts of Europe, all along the shores of the Atlantic. Well, it's well known by more people than you're even trying to pull into your little eye here that Africa wasn't even called Africa in ancient times. That was a real modern thing that happened, and it used to be called Libya. So at the point that there was the Afri of Africa, and then Africa showing up on that map in Spain type area, was during a time that breaks that AD range, not anything back here at all either. Oh yeah, so it's that Berber thing in the Spain, the conquest, and the Moors. Again, it has nothing to do with Africans. One of the grand two divisions of the world. So you're trying to say here that Caucasians said there was two big places in the world and they gave it a third. Well, what's the third? Is it Europe? Where did Europe get its name? Well, a Phoenician princess, redheaded. Yeah, she took a ride on a sacred white cow and stuff, just like what's in Egypt and just like in the River Boyne. It's way over here in British and UK lands over there. It has that same connotation, but also at Christmas, by the way, I showed you it connects to the ancient people that lived near Göbekli Tepe shortly after that time in Catalhoyuk. They had that sacred white cow. In fact, the connective here is that's the reason they call it the Milky Way. We still do today. So this appellation, Africa, is real modern kind of in comparison. Before it was all called Libya. The Ethiopians that are described in the Iliad and the Odyssey, if you'll look at Herodotus' map, are the brown areas that are blotches, and they're really just river people. They end up being sunburnt faces or whatever during this time. Caucasians were trying to keep themselves pale and so on, especially the women. It's the reason in the art that's through all of this area that we're talking about, including Egypt, that you see red ochre males and pale women. And we're not confused about any of those people, are we? But people want to try to act confused about Egypt. I guess a good answer to end this with is that Erkan Kilik says, yeah, it was, and we're all from Africa. Cheers. Well, if that was to the original concept of her trying to say, yeah, you look like this, no. But if you want to say they were darker skinned, blue-eyed Caucasians running around lollygagging, we'd be okay with it because part of our genetics are from that, and that they were part from Africa. And some of these other people that are around here lived in Africa or lived up in Asia way over here at one time and helped herald civilizations everywhere, including where that girl Francois originally came from in the first place. And in a modern day, it's quite disgusting to have to go through all of this, and people act like there's just questions. Like, well, I'm unsure. No, you're either trying to start something or you're trying to go, push some agenda that's BS. Let's look at a few of those questions I could click on right now on the way out here. How do you prove the ancient Egyptians were black? Well, you can't, because they weren't. Was the ancient Europe white? Well, they were Caucasians. Were there some that were darker? Yeah, they all had blue eyes too, but none of them were black. Were the ancient Semites black? No, nobody in the Bible is black. That's a Caucasian religion. Noah landed in the Caucasus Mountains, for Christ's sake. Why do some people keep using images of one construction of Mesolithic Cheddar Man to allegedly prove that all ancient Europeans, including Greeks, Romans, and Etruscans, were black somehow? Well, that usually goes along with jealousy. Yeah. And low self-esteem and no accomplishment whatsoever, and then they lash out and try to grab a hold of Caucasian civilizations like the blue-eyed Egyptians. Look up blue-eyed Egyptians in any, Google or DuckDuckGo, and look under images, and you'll find crystallized blue statues from the earliest of dynasties. You can find ginger from before then too. Look up the range of Cro-Magnon men. Put in Cro-Magnon range, and it'll show you. There's the Mediterranean. Oh, there's a bunch of them in North Africa. Yeah, all of those. In fact, Homo sapiens is 315,000 years in that same North Africa. Were there any black Africans in medieval Europe? No, very, very few. Very few. There were some, and they actually still had them as a sideshow act until 1600s or so. You can look it up. But why do some American blacks claim they are descendants of ancient Egyptians? Well, they're forced to be around the spacemen all day, and they seem to think it's a competition, and that, like a rap battle, they've got to do something. And while they can't really perform well enough to do something that shows it in a modern day, they figured they'd just claim that they weren't the primitives that everybody knew that they were, and roots and all those things that come out of that they were actually the Caucasian blue-eyed Egyptians that they didn't even know existed. And so it's hilarious, and it's going to be a joke for a long time, but let's continue. Was Europe named after a black woman? No, I said a minute ago, Europe was named after Europa. She's a Phoenician princess. It's well known. And this was where she married into a people. And then that supposedly started off the Minoans. Yeah, you got to look into it. How many of them were black? None of them. What were the reasons why people say ancient Greeks were black? Again, it's the same jealousy situation. And then, of course, they try to look at their vases, and they're only made out of 3 colors: dark red, whitish, tan, like the pottery, or white, and black. And if they see anybody in that darker color, red or black, oh my God, then black people were we was Greeks. How did Europeans find black people, or even figure out that there were people outside of Europe? Well, the Phoenicians, again, had gone around the Cape all the way. And in fact, the Greeks didn't even believe them whenever they came through. They told them that the sun ended up being on the other side of the boat during a time which would have been summer, so it pulling north and getting around there, they passed the equator, and they explained that idea. And the Greeks are like, what? Because if you look at Herodotus' map, they thought it just died off at the Sahara and over here at the Cape Horn and just went across. So they didn't know sub-Saharan Africa existed. How'd they find them? They eventually went down there with a boat, around that situation with a boat again, and they found people. A very, very primitive people living there that they never knew existed. And in turn, those people